I'm Lori, 72, standing in the kitchen of our new home in Boston, surrounded by the laughter of my granddaughters and the warmth of family. I'm filled with a sense of contentment I never thought possible. But it wasn't always like this. My journey to this moment was filled with loss, heartbreak, and unexpected revelations. It all started when I turned 72. I was a wealthy widow, with millions in the bank and a large, empty house. My only son, Ethan, was a successful lawyer, and we spoke on the phone every week. But then, one fateful day, I received a call from the police. Ethan had been in a car accident and didn't make it. My world shattered in an instant. The funeral was a blur of grief and sadness. I sat in the front row, wearing the black dress I'd bought for my husband's funeral years ago, hoping I'd never have to wear it again. As I listened to the eulogies and watched as they lowered Ethan's casket into the ground, I felt a pain like no other. I couldn't believe he was gone. After the service, as the crowd began to disperse, I noticed three little girls standing at a distance. They were identical triplets, about 9 years old, with long, dark hair and big, brown eyes. They were holding hands and looking at Ethan's grave with such sadness and grief that it broke my heart. As they approached the grave, each girl carried a single white flower. They placed them carefully on the dirt, one by one, and then stood there in silence. I heard one of them whisper, "Bye, Daddy." My heart stopped. Had I heard that right? Did one of these girls just call Ethan Daddy? I must have made a sound because all three girls turned to look at me. Their faces showed surprise, then fear. Without saying another word, they turned and ran towards the parking lot. I stood there, frozen, watching them disappear. I couldn't shake the image of those three little girls or the sound of that small voice saying, "Bye, Daddy." I started going back to the cemetery every day, hoping to see them again. I needed to know if I'd really heard what I thought I had. A week later, I finally saw them again. They were wearing school uniforms and walking slowly towards Ethan's grave, each carrying a single flower. I stayed very still, afraid that any movement might frighten them away. As they placed their flowers on the grave, I stepped forward. "Hello," I said softly. The girls looked up at me, their eyes wide with fear. "I'm Lori, Ethan's mother," I said. "I saw you here the other day. Who are you?" One of the girls, the one who seemed to be the leader, stepped forward. "I'm Lily," she said, her voice polite but cautious. "These are my sisters, Ava and Mia. We're Daddy's daughters." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Ethan had children? How was that possible? He'd never mentioned them to me. I sat down on the grass next to the girls and asked them some questions. They told me that their mother had died when they were very young, and they'd been living with their Aunt Grace ever since. They said that Ethan had visited them every other weekend and had been a wonderful father. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan had kept this a secret from me for so long.
Why?
That night, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by sympathy flowers and casserole dishes from neighbors. The house felt impossibly quiet. I kept thinking about those three little girls and the secret Ethan had kept from me. I decided to find out more about them. I went to Ethan's apartment building and spoke to the manager. He told me that he'd seen the girls there a few times, always with an older woman. He described the woman as being in her 50s, with short, graying hair and a kind face. I knew that woman had to be Aunt Grace. I tracked her down and arranged to meet her at a coffee shop. When I told her who I was, her face paled. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and guilt. "I'm sorry," she said. "Ethan asked me not to tell you about the girls. He was afraid it would be too much for you to handle." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ethan had thought I couldn't handle knowing about his children? I was his mother. Grace explained that the girl's mother had had a genetic condition that affected her muscles. She'd passed away when the girls were only 3 years old. Ethan had been devastated, and he'd worried that I would be too. He'd also been worried about the girls' future. The genetic condition was hereditary, and there was a chance that the girls had inherited it. He'd wanted to protect me from the pain and worry that would come with knowing that. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. I was angry at Ethan for keeping this secret from me, but I also understood why he'd done it. He'd been trying to protect me. Grace told me that two of the girls, Ava and Mia, had inherited the genetic condition. It was a rare and progressive disease that would cause their muscles to weaken over time. They would need ongoing medical care and support. I knew then that I had to be there for the girls. They were my granddaughters, and I loved them already. I offered to help Grace with the girls' medical expenses and to be more involved in their lives. At first, she was hesitant. She was afraid that I would try to take the girls away from her. But I assured her that all I wanted was to be a part of their lives. Slowly, Grace began to trust me. We started spending more time together, and I got to know the girls better. They were amazing children, full of energy and love. Despite their challenges, they were always smiling and laughing. A few weeks later, the girls' doctor called with some news. The progression of Ava and Mia's condition was more aggressive than they'd initially thought. There was an experimental treatment program at a hospital in Boston that might help, but it was expensive and required a long-term commitment. I didn't hesitate. I told Grace that we were going to do whatever it took to help the girls. We would move to Boston, rent a place near the hospital, and do everything we could to give them the best chance at a normal life. Grace was overwhelmed. She thanked me, but she was also worried about the cost and the disruption to the girls' lives. I told her not to worry. I had the resources to take care of everything, and the most important thing was the girls' health. The girls were excited about the idea of moving to Boston. They were looking forward to starting a new adventure and getting the treatment they needed. We spent the next few months preparing for the move. I hired the best specialists and arranged for home care nurses and tutors for the girls' schooling. Grace found a new job at the hospital's patient advocacy office, which allowed her to use her experience to help other families. The treatment program was tough. There were days when Ava and Mia were too sick from the medications to do anything but sleep. There were days when Lily felt left out because so much attention was focused on her sisters. And there were days when Grace and I were so tired we could barely think straight. But there were also good days. Days when Ava's muscle strength tests showed improvement. Days when Mia could walk a little farther than she had the day before. Days when all three girls laughed so hard at something ridiculous that we forgot to worry about test results and treatment schedules. As time went on, the girls' condition began to stabilize. Ava and Mia were making progress, and Lily was thriving. They were happy and healthy, and I felt like I'd found a new purpose in life. We decided to stay in Boston permanently. We found a beautiful house near the hospital with a big backyard for the girls to play in and a music room for Ava, who loved to play the piano. Now, as I stand in the kitchen, listening to the girls' laughter and the sound of Ava playing the piano in the other room, I feel a sense of peace and contentment. Ethan may be gone, but his legacy lives on in these three amazing girls. I'm grateful for the journey I've been on, even though it was filled with pain and heartbreak. It led me to these girls, and they've given me more love and joy than I ever thought possible. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about the people who come into your life and make it better. And these girls are my family through and through. I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar?
Comment below.
And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.